I'm Jordan Poole from the University of Michigan Basketball. You are watching TR Sports. Please enjoy.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to TR Sports. I'm your host, Toby, and we're coming after, this is the podcast after our first break in 12 weeks. So this is a fresh start for the podcast after the 12-week streak that we were on earlier. I didn't do it because, I was tired that week. I just came back from Maine, and I was just doing a lot at that time, and I didn't feel like I had time to make a podcast, and if I did, I didn't feel like I was able to put out the best product possible. But we are back this week with 4 different stories. But one more thing is I'm going away again, and I'm going to a far away place that's not Maine. So I'm going to take a 2-week break when I'm going on that trip. There's going to be a 2-week break for the podcast, but I'm sure you guys can handle it. So let's talk about sports now. So here are 4 stories. First, we're going to talk about the Russell Westbrook-Chris Paul exchange. Who won the deal? Do I think it was a good trade? Then we're going to talk about some possible MLB trade deadline deals, because that is coming up. And then we're going to talk about the Los Angeles Clippers and their new dynasty, possible dynasty that they have brewing in LA over there with Paul George and Kawhi. Then we're going to round out the podcast with a team focus. So let's just get right into our first story. Chris Paul, Russell Westbrook exchange. The Rockets wanted to compete, and OKC lost Paul George, and they decided, They decided that they were going to start from scratch. They're going to trade away Westbrook after PG left, and they're going to have Adams. They'll keep Adams, and they're going to try to trade some other players for draft picks, and that's what they did. They had Russell Westbrook's big contract. They took on another big contract, that is Chris Paul's, and they were able to bring down the level of talent of their team so they can tank by getting rid of Westbrook, but they're also able to get all these future picks from other teams that goes up until 2026. Yes, they have a pick already that's not theirs from 2026. These kids are like 10-year-olds who are going to be drafted at that point. But yeah, that's what they did. So they got rid of the Westbrook because they wanted to rebuild, and they got Chris Paul, who's got this massive contract, and they were trying to move Chris Paul because, in many people's opinion, he's kind of washed up, not what he was, and I kind of agree with that because he's also known as a locker room hazard. And if I'm a team, I'm not looking for Chris Paul, who could give me a little extra production and a big name. I would rather have a guy like Rajon Rondo, who's a low-key, not too big of an issue in the locker room. Why did OKC did this trade? You're asking if they trade away Westbrook for this guy that I'm saying is bad, washed up, bad in the locker room, Chris Paul. That's because I said the draft picks. That's why OKC did this, and they think they can still contend for a playoff spot with their center that they kept, Steven Adams and Chris Paul. They think they could possibly do it. I don't really think they will, but they have plenty of draft picks to build for the future, so that is great for OKC fans. But you did lose some great players, which sucks, but you have a bright future going forward, and a great GM and Sam Presti. Now, the Rockets side of this deal, you are coming off 2 back-to-back playoff losses to the Warriors, one in the Western Conference Finals, and one in the divisional round, which was this year, where they lost to Kevin Durant-less Warriors. You could go back to other podcasts to see what I thought about that matchup. But they wanted to bring in extra firepower. They want to make a run to get out of the Western Conference so they could get to the finals. And their idea of upgrading and something that could put them over the top is trading Chris Paul for Russell Westbrook, who won MVP a couple years ago, but since then has kind of slowed down and wanted out of OKC. So they get this, definitely an upgraded point guard. Russell Westbrook is certainly a better point guard than Chris Paul. They don't care about the contract right now, and they don't care about the picks they gave away because they're in win now mode, and they feel like, and they're right, that their window is closing. They don't have an infinite amount of time to win a championship. So they get Westbrook, and that should really help that team out, especially because their other star, James Harden, has played with this Russell Westbrook in OKC because James Harden used to play for that team until they traded him, and since then Harden has become a superstar. But that's besides the point. He and Russell Westbrook have played together. They have chemistry. They should be able to click relatively well, even though they're both ball-dominant players. So in conclusion, OKC, good trade for you guys. You were able to get all these picks. Yes, you took on Chris Paul's contract, but you could possibly make a run for a playoff spot in the Western Conference, even though I don't think OKC will. But you got the draft picks. You're starting to rebuild. I feel like it was a good trade for OKC. And for the Rockets, it's more of a question mark. I feel like, yes, they had to make this move. Did they give up a little much? Maybe. But they were able to get a superstar on their team to add another superstar to their already stacked team. So they were able to add a great player, which, of course, I believe they had to do. But the question mark in the whole situation is, how is Russell Westbrook and James Harden going to play together? And we'll find that out in a couple months when the NBA season starts back up again. But that is a blockbuster deal that has happened. Big deal. I'm sorry about that noise. I just hit my mic. But next story, we're going to be talking about the MLB trade deadline, possible deals, what could happen. Is Syndergaard going to get traded? I don't even know. Right here on TR Sports. Welcome back to TR Sports. Before we get into our next story, which is the MLB trade deadline, I just want to say there was a couple stories last week that I just want to mention quick. One of those being the U.S. Women's National Team. Congratulations to that team. Incredible job. That was a while ago now, but it was last week's news, so great job to that team and those players. They did a great job representing America. And then the MLB All-Star Game, it was really fun this year. Vladimir Guerrero put on a show. Were the balls juiced? No one knows. A lot of the players are saying that, but personally, I have no idea. So there's been a lot of accusations. And if you look at some of the like the home runs from a couple years ago, from this year's Home Run Derby, there's a lot more home runs recently than there were before. So there's a lot of accusations of balls being juiced. But again, I have no idea. And those were the stories that I really wanted to mention, but I forgot to do it earlier in the podcast. So I did it now. But let's get into the subject that where I'm here to talk about with you guys. And that's the MLB trade deadline, because the deadline is on the 31st of July. It's a little early this year. And I mean, it is more than a week away from now. But the thing is, everyone's talking about it, so I figured, you know what? Why not tackle it in this episode, just to talk about some baseball and talk about a lot of players I wanted to talk about, because this is a particularly interesting deadline year. There's more big-name players being mentioned than the past couple years. So it's exciting to talk about, and other people are talking about it. So I said, you know what? Why not jump on that bandwagon and talk about it? And if you look at a lot of the players that might be dealt during the trade deadline to either a team that doesn't want to win and they're trading a player away, or a team that either is trying to get one of those players, almost all of them are pitchers this year. A lot of the great ones. There's a couple players, when I say ones, that are not pitchers, but the majority of the big-name ones are pitchers. And we're going to start in Texas. There's this pitcher who's having a great year, Mike Minor. Especially earlier, he had a great ERA. He was doing a great job. He has gone down in production a little since the beginning of the season, but so is the rest of his team. And he might be dealt because Texas had a great start to the season. They were a pleasant surprise, and they could possibly still make a wild card spot But do they really need a pitcher like this? No. And could they get a lot back for Mike Minor? The answer is yes. So they might be making moves there. And that's a certain trade that could happen. But do I think we'll see that Mike Minor trade? No, just because he's been very vocal about the leaving Texas. He said, did I sign here just to get traded? And he's been really vocal about that. And I also think Texas, out of a lot of the teams that have players that might get traded, they're the least likely to pull one of these big pitching trades off. So I don't really believe that's going to happen with Mike Minor. But one that I do believe might happen is Trevor Bauer. Trevor Bauer from the Indians. He's a great pitcher. A couple years ago, he had a great playoffs until he injured his finger in a drone accident, so he had to leave a game. But that's a whole nother story. But Trevor Bauer, one of my favorite pitchers. Apparently, he's a good guy. And what I've seen of him, he's a good guy. He did make some enemies along the way, so a lot of people also don't think Trevor Bauer's a great guy, but personally, I really like him. He's also a great pitcher. But the question is, will the Indians trade Trevor Bauer? And I thought a couple weeks ago, yes, it's going to happen 100%. And it's looking a little different now because Trevor Bauer and the Indians, they're on a run. They've been 27-11 since the beginning of June, and that's great. That's a great record, and it looks like they were going to absolutely get killed in the AL Central by the Twins, but that's not what it's looking like right now because somehow this Indians team is making a run. And are they going to get rid of Trevor Bauer? At this point, I don't think so. I think he's going to stay for a little while longer, maybe trade him away at some other point, but I don't believe he's going to go now. They're just in contention for something. It's similar to the Texas situation. And I don't think it's going to happen. And a lot of these teams, like the Phillies, who could really use some of these pitchers, they've already announced they don't want to do it. They're not going to blow away some of their future for a pitcher that might not even bring them over the hump this year. Also, there's some pitchers like Marcus Stroman from the Blue Jays, tiny, but has a reputation for being a great pitcher, even though he was voted the most overrated pitcher last year by the players. But I think he's a good pitcher personally. He's on a bad team. He was an all-star. He's got not a great ERA, but it's in the low threes right now. But he's had some great years, and he had some great potential. And he could still end up fulfilling some of that potential down the line. But he's a good pitcher. Is he a little overrated? Yes. The answer is yes. He is a little overrated, and I think the Blue Jays are going to move him. It's going to happen. But the question is, if the Blue Jays are asking for a lot, I don't know if a team is going to be willing to pull that deal off. So if the Blue Jays do deal Marcus Stroman, like I think they might, then they're going to have to lower their price than what they probably want to give up because Marcus Stroman is overrated statistically. If you look at his statistics, you could think he's overrated. And also other teams view him as an overrated player. So I don't think they're going to give up the amount that the Blue Jays probably want for Marcus Stroman. But that's just what I think. So I think there will be a trade pulled off with Marcus Stroman. I don't think there's going to be a Trevor Bauer trade. And I don't think there's going to be a Mike Minor trade. There's more players like Madison Bumgarner who could be dealt. But if those really develop later on, we will talk about more deadline stuff next week. But I'm not sure if that will happen. So if that does happen, if more develops around Madison Bumgarner, who could be dealt to the Yankees, I'll talk about that next week. But so far, these three is what I really wanted to talk about for this segment. So that concludes this segment about the trade deadline. Next on TR Sports, we're going to be talking about the LA Clippers and how a dynasty just seemed to have came out of nowhere. And do I think they will be a dynasty? Do I think they're going to win a lot of championships? You're about to find that out on TR Sports. Welcome back to TR Sports. Let's talk about the LA Clippers. For me, this story has been weeks in the making, just because this happened 2 weeks ago, and that week, the week when this whole Clippers situation happened, I already finished the podcast editing, so I just added a little bonus clip, 40-second clip at the end of the podcast talking about it, but I didn't really get to go into detail about the situation and everything. And then last week, I took a break from the podcast, so we didn't talk about it. But finally, we are here talking about the LA Clippers. So if we really want to understand what happened and how the Clippers traded for Paul George and how they signed Kawhi Leonard in free agency, we're going to have to go back to 2 years ago in San Antonio. Kawhi Leonard was a stud. He was having a great year in 2017. He had a crazy play, actually, where he hit a game winner and blocked James Harden's game winner. And right after that, they drug tested him because they thought he was too good. So that's how good he was. But the next year he got injured, and that's because in the playoffs of 2017, the infamous Zaza Pachulia stepped on his leg after Kawhi was coming down after shooting a shot, and Kawhi was injured. So that's what happened to Kawhi. And the next season, 2018, he was injured for the whole season, played about 17 games, wasn't very good in it. So the Spurs wanted to move on with Kawhi Leonard. They thought, they should probably get rid of him, and especially Kawhi wanted to leave the Spurs. It was more Kawhi than the Spurs. He wanted to go to LA. But the Raptors wouldn't trade him to LA. The Spurs wouldn't trade him to LA, but the Raptors wanted Kawhi Leonard, and this was considered a risky move. So the Raptors decided, this guy doesn't want to be in San Antonio. We are a couple pieces away from winning the championship. So us, the Raptors, we're going to trade for Kawhi Leonard. So that's what they do. They get Kawhi Leonard in a trade. They trade one of their stars at the time, DeMar DeRozan, for Kawhi Leonard. So now the Raptors have Kawhi Leonard, and going into the season, they were expected to, be a contender for the East, maybe come out of the East, not win the championship. And as we all know, what happened was the Raptors went to the finals, won it after Kawhi Leonard's incredible finals run, and now he's one of the biggest names in basketball. So that happened really quickly, but the issue and why this move was considered risky at the time for the Raptors, not only because Kawhi was injured, was because he was a free agent the very next year. So this is where we go back to 2 weeks ago. Kawhi Leonard is a free agent, and he has to make his decision. A lot of people said the Raptors. A lot of people said the Lakers. I think I said the Lakers. Because I thought the Clippers were out of it. Like, everyone thought the Clippers had no chance at Kawhi. What do they do? Clippers signed Kawhi. And the very same night, they traded for Paul George. So this is where we're going to go back a couple weeks. Paul George and Russell Westbrook were playing the Portland Trail Blazers in the divisional round of the playoffs. And what happened was they lost in 5. It was their second year losing like this. It was terrible for them. Absolutely terrible. And they lose from Damian Lillard's game winner. We talked about it in episode 2 of the podcast. And it's looking bad for OKC, but no one expected Paul George to request a trade. And I talked about this with Russell Westbrook. No one expected this team to disband this offseason. But that all changed when Paul George requested a trade after talking to Kawhi Leonard so he could team up with Kawhi in LA, the very same night that Kawhi signed with LA. So they pull off this massive deal where Paul George goes to the Clippers for a bunch of draft picks, Gallinari and all. It was a big deal. So it's like the deal we talked about earlier with OKC. OKC got a lot for their future from these Clippers picks and players too. So that's how this all unfolded. This is how the Clippers got Paul George and Kawhi Leonard on the same team. It's a big deal. It was a big deal for the Clippers. And now they are able to contend, and they are able to contend for championships. And, the title I put for this segment was Dynasty Builder. And it's very possible that this team can win a bunch of championships in however many years, 5 years, let's say. But it's also very possible that this Clippers team can lose to the other team in LA, the Lakers that we talked about with LeBron and Anthony Davis. So that's what makes this year so interesting. And personally, I believe this Clippers team is great. I don't have them going to the finals. I have LeBron's Lakers probably going to the finals. It's not final. No pun intended on my part. This is what I'm just thinking now. Just because of the depth that the Lakers are getting, and they have LeBron and AD. So this is certainly going to be an interesting year all across the league, and this just spices it up even more. So exciting things to come in LA. You should be a great team. If you're a Clippers fan, be excited. You should be really excited because you have a great team now. Just like you did a couple years ago with Lob City, just even better. So that wraps this Clippers segment up. When we come back in TR Sports, we're going to be talking about the Washington Nationals and the Team Focus and their crazy hot run that they are currently on. Right here on TR Sports. Welcome back to TR Sports. As always, you heard the intro. You know what time it is. It is Team Focus. And today we're going to be talking about the Washington Nationals, who are crazy hot. And we've talked about them in bits because we did a couple NL East teams. So we've talked about the Nationals a little bit on Team Focus before, but we haven't actually done a Team Focus on them. So we're doing that now. The Nationals, okay, I know you guys love when I do backstory, and I think I've done backstory for like all the segments in today's podcast, so I'm going to do some more backstory. The offseason last summer for the not last summer, but they had a crazy offseason, the Nationals, this winter is what I meant. No one knew if they were going to get Bryce Harper, and people thought if they lost Bryce Harper, they weren't going to be the team they were before. Not just because of the play of Bryce Harper, but because of the spirit. And the Nationals came out of the gate, and it looked like that was the case. They lose Bryce Harper in the offseason to the Phillies, and they come out and they suck. They were terrible. Nothing clicked. Pitching was bad. Bullpen was bad, and they just weren't good. And as a team, they weren't good. But since June 1st, this team has turned the ship around. Since June 1st, the Washington Nationals are 27-12. That is a record. That is quite a record. And you can ask, why is that? I just think mostly because the team clicked. I don't think it was anything super specific. But if you look on paper, this team is great. They have a young player, Juan Soto. And Soto is so good. He, I think, eventually will live up to expectations. You have great pitchers. You paid a lot of great pitchers. Max Scherzer, Steven Strasburg has been getting hot since June 1st, and especially around the All-Star break, he was really hot. And then you have Max Scherzer. So these Corbin, Scherzer, and Strasburg combo is great. And, your bullpen, all they had to do was be respectable, and that's what they've done. They're a more respectable version of what they were before. Doolittle's a great. And the whole pitching right now is really clicking for them, and it helps that they also have a great offense. They have Anthony Rendon, who could even consider a dark horse MVP candidate. So you have a dark horse MVP candidate. You have Brian Dozier, who's having a decent season. And the team is clicking. They really are. And could they win the NL East? I don't think so. I think, they're going to have to slow down from 27-12 eventually. And I also don't think they're going to beat the Braves. But I do think they're going to get a wild card spot over the Phillies. It's really up in the air if the Phillies will make the playoffs right now, and the Phillies are just trending downwards. So this Nationals team is really taking advantage of that. So they're now second in the National NL East, and the Phillies fall to third. So they're really thriving under these conditions. And since June 1st, they've been they've been great. I mean, they don't mash homers like a lot of teams. They only have 58 homers since June 1st, but they're still a great team. And you can see their 283 strikeouts. That's a great number. And they're really playing well. They are playing well right when they need to be, right where they could take advantage of the Phillies and the Mets, who are actually getting hot themselves too, but they're not as hot as the Nationals yet because the Mets have just gotten hot recently, like really recently. So the Nationals are in a great position for a wild card spot, and great position to compete in the National League East. And I think they're going to clinch a wild card spot. How far they're going to make it into the playoffs, I don't know. But once this team clicked in early June, you could really see that there was a lot of potential there. And the bullpen got better. They've just, as a team, improved a lot. I don't think there's anything really specific that you can point to and say, that's why. Because that's not the case. They're not that kind of team. They just had the potential. Were terrible to start the season. Since June 1st, with their 27-12 record, they have been great. And that concludes this team focus with the Nationals. It wasn't a very statistic-driven team focus, but, I like talking about my opinions a lot in team focus. Every once in a while, we have a statistic-filled team focus. We had a couple today, but nothing crazy. Not like the Rays one I did a couple weeks ago, where I feel like I did a great job with the statistics in that one, but not every team focus is the same. So that concludes the Nationals team focus. Actually, just one more thing. I forgot to give the Nationals a grade. Probably the Nationals are around a B+ right now. I know I gave the Phillies an A-, but that was before all the injuries, and I still believe if the Phillies were completely healthy, they would be an A-. But I think this Nationals team is a B+. Might be a little generous. I'm not sure. But that's the grade I give the Nationals. And that concludes the podcast. I hope you guys enjoyed. I don't want to keep rambling on forever like I usually do, but we gained about a bunch of subscribers, like 3 last week, and that's great for us because we're growing. And if you're one of those new subscribers, welcome. I put a lot of effort into these. I try to make the best product possible for the viewers that we have, and it's really fun to make a product that people can watch and that they can enjoy and know that I'm making this for someone, and that's the fun of growing the audience. So thank you guys for watching TR Sports so much. Thank you guys for watching the podcast. Again, I'll see you next week. I'll announce if I'm taking another break because, again, I'm going away again, and I will take a 2-week break eventually, but I think there'll be a podcast next week. But until then, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you all later.